So far, things that we've talked about haven't really been rocket science. But you know what? Let's talk about some rocket science. How does a rocket work? Specifically, what are the forces acting on a rocket, and how can we use those forces to make the rocket fly how we want it to? So the first primary forces that are acting on a rocket, first, it's weight. The rocket itself has some weight, and the fuel that is in there also has some weight. In the case of a water-powered rocket, typically, the weight of the water that's in there is quite a bit more than the weight of the outer shell itself. Now the next force is, it got me pretty wet, is thrust. Thrust is caused by the rocket shooting its fuel out of a nozzle, and then Newton's third law, which states that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, means that not only is the rocket shooting water and pushing it out, but that water is pushing the rocket forwards. And this is how thrust works. It's a force that acts pushing the rocket forwards. In this case, we have a pretty simple rocket with just one nozzle. So the thrust is acting in this direction, right through the center of the bottle, out the nozzle, pushing it that way. When you combine weight and thrust, these two forces, you can get different paths depending on what angle you combine them in. For example, if I am aiming this straight down, the thrust, the water coming out, is going to be pushing the bottle down. And the weight of the bottle is also going to be pushing the bottle down. So with both of these forces pretty well aligned, it's pretty obvious what the path is going to be. It's going to go straight down. Now you'll notice that actually didn't shoot that well. The reason is because this time we weren't shooting the water out. Because we had it aimed straight down, the air was up here. So we were only shooting the air out. And the air, it flows a lot easier than water. So it goes out so fast that it just went, and the thrust didn't last very long and it didn't do much. So even though the thrust was acting down and weight was acting down, it was almost the same as just dropping. Now we'll squeeze this all out because we want to have this empty so we have as much compressible air in there before we shoot it off again. And then we'll look at another scenario. In this scenario, the weight is going to be acting down because that's how gravity works. Weight's always down. But this time, we're going to aim the thrust up. For the first part of the flight, the thrust is greater than the weight. So our bottle accelerates upwards. It shoots into the sky. Then at some point, that thrust pitters out, and the weight starts to be bigger than the thrust. And then it falls back down to the ground. But still, our motion is pretty much in one line, up and down. Now, if you combine these two forces in anything other than a straight line, you'll get an arc. The rocket shoots across. So now we'll look at what happens when these forces are perpendicular. And the thrust is going sideways, and the weight, like always, still going down. Now you might be thinking, wait, you shot that sideways, but it didn't really fly sideways. Well, no, it didn't. That's for a couple of reasons. One is nothing was pushing it up. The thrust was this way, and the weight was going this way. So when you combine those two, it's going to be something that's some sort of angle down. The other reason is the thrust didn't stay in the same direction the whole time. It curved down. Now, I'm going to try to explain this without getting too technical, but the reason for that is because, remember how I talked about how the thrust is on this straight axis, straight through the center of the nozzle. The weight, however, is actually a little bit different. I'm going to fill it up again so we can look at it. So the weight, you might think, is also straight through the middle, which would be true, except that the bottle is only partially full of water, and the rest of it is air. Now, water's a lot heavier than air. That means we have more weight on the bottom than we do on the top. So the weight isn't going right through the middle. It's the center of gravity, which is where the weight is acting. It's actually a little bit lower. If we have the weight and the inertia of the bottle here, but the thrust is acting a little bit higher than that, what's going to happen as it flies is you're actually going to get a little bit of rotational motion, meaning it's going to rotate down. Now, as it does that, now the thrust is actually, since we're shooting this way, and the thrust is acting in the opposite direction, now the thrust is actually pointing a little bit down too, which makes it go even more that way, and more that way, and more that way. So what happens when you shoot it horizontal is it goes and pretty much shoots pretty straight into the ground. So maybe you don't like any of the flight paths we've gotten so far. Straight down was pretty boring. Shooting it straight up and coming back down, that one was fun. I like that. Shooting it sideways and having it go into the ground, I think we can do better than that. So the answer is, we need to change the angle and the direction of our thrust. Meaning, we need to aim this bottle up more. But maybe not all the way up, because we want it to go out too. Maybe we're trying to shoot it into a group of friends. So now, it shot out. We got a pretty good trajectory. Still kind of curvy and wonky though. Which means, I wonder if there's another force that we could use to keep this thing a little bit more stable. Now, what's happening is there actually is a third force that's happening on this bottle. It's not quite as strong as thrust or the weight, but it's still a very real force. And that force is drag. Now, drag is dependent on two things. It's dependent on how fast something's going. It also depends on how that thing is shaped. For an example, a parachute has lots of surface area. It's designed to capture lots of air and create lots of drag. So in a parachute, drag is fighting weight, but there's so much drag happening that they're going down pretty slowly. So that's one example of how shape can change drag. Now this, as it stands, it's the shape that it is. There isn't really anything that we can do to change its shape. We can change its orientation, but it still is the shape that it is. But we want to make sure that as it's flying, that the thrust is always at the back. That way it flies pretty straight and we don't get some of this wonky waviness that it tends to do. Now, how can we do that? Well, let's look at some things throughout history that have been made and designed to fly through the air pretty straight, even though they're not going super fast most of the time. Now we can look at things like arrows, darts, and heck, while we're at it, we're talking about rockets, let's look at rockets. And what all these things have in common with their shape is that they tend to have fins at the back. Now why is that? Well, in the case of arrows and darts, those things are projectiles. They don't have thrust happening at the back, but you still do want them to fly straight, and you want to make sure that the pointy end sticks out.
Do you know how to use that thing?
Yes. The pointy end goes into the other man.
This is going to take a lot of work.
Now the solution to that is to put fins at the back. The way that the fins work is it's something that has a lot of drag, but it's also something that's drag changes with the direction. I'm gonna grab an arrow to show you. So to show you how things like arrows and darts stay straight, I made kind of a crappy little dart here out of a nail with some paper stuff stuck to it. Now, often they're shaped like this, typically with some fins in the back. And the way this works is that if it's traveling straight, then the wind is going past the fins like this, and it's not a lot of area for the wind to hit, so it's pretty low drag. But if it starts to go off to one side, now the wind is hitting this part pretty hard and there's a lot of drag, and it pushes on this part, which actually pushes it straight. So these arrows and darts are actually self-correcting. When they start to veer off, this pushes it straight, pushes it straight, pushes it straight. Now, if we were to apply this to a rocket, I need to find my rocket. Okay, so I found my rocket. Typically your fins on a rocket are gonna be kinda like on the side like this, but for simplicity, I'm just gonna take this and put it in there. So now we got the same deal. Fins on the back of something flying through the air. As it tries to change direction, that drag increases and it pushes it straight, pushes it straight. Now the difference here is that it's not only pushing the object straight, it's also making sure that the thrust coming out of the back of that object, that big force that's shooting it through the air, it also stays straight. So adding that fins really can do a lot to make a rocket stay straighter and fly straighter. And without them, often they tend to kind of shoot up and then get back down, and they're pretty wonky and out of control. So your challenge is to add fins to your rocket to try to make it fly better and fly straighter. And then take it out, test it, shoot it, see if it works. Maybe change your fin design, add some new fins, until you get something that you're happy with. Try taking a video of your rocket as you shoot it so that you can see, possibly in slow motion even, what's really happening, and so that you can know what to work on and what to improve. And then tinker with it and do the best that you can to make this already cool rocket even cooler.